You don't exist anymore. Not in the way you used to. And that's why you stare free. Let me explain. There was a version of you that needed approval, a version that waited for replies, a version that shaped itself to be accepted, understood, remembered. That version is gone, and if that scares you, good. Fear is the first sign that an old identity just collapsed. Most people never experience this moment. They spend their entire lives trying to stay visible, relevant, needed. You didn't. You disappeared. And disappearance is not failure. It is withdrawal of energy from what never deserved it. Listen carefully. Freedom does not come from becoming more. It comes from needing less. Now let me walk you through the truth. Most people will never say out loud. 1. When you stop seeking validation, you vanish from weak minds. You didn't stop existing. You stopped performing. And most people have no idea how to interact with someone who is no longer performing for them. For a long time, you were visible because you were responsive. You explained yourself. You softened your words. You adjusted your tone so people wouldn't misunderstand you, feel uncomfortable, or question their own behavior. You filled silences. You clarified intentions. You reassured others even when you were unsure yourself. That effort made you familiar, not respected, not understood, just familiar. The moment you stopped doing that, something unsettling happened. Conversations changed. Responses slowed. Invitations faded. People who once felt close suddenly acted distant. And it felt confusing at first, because from your side nothing negative had happened. You didn't attack anyone. You didn't betray anyone. You simply stopped bending. And when you stop bending, weak minds lose their grip on you. Most people do not see who you are. They see how you regulate their emotions. They see how you make them feel important, comfortable, validated, entertained, reassured, or superior. Your presence was never about your essence. It was about the function you served in their inner world. So when you stopped feeding that function, their interest dropped. Not because you became less valuable, but because you became less useful. This is the part people struggle to accept. Humans like to believe relationships are built on depth and sincerity. In reality, many are built on unconscious emotional transactions. You listen. They feel seen. You agree. They feel right. You respond quickly. They feel important. You explain yourself. They feel secure. Take that away. And suddenly they don't know where you fit. So they say, you changed. They say, you stare distant. They say you stir not the same anymore. What they really mean is simple. You stopped maintaining the version of yourself that benefited me. That version required constant effort, constant awareness of other people's moods, constant self-monitoring, constant emotional labor. It required you to be readable, accessible, predictable, and the truth is the real you never lived there. The real you was buried under that performance. When you stopped chasing reactions, people stopped seeing you because reaction was the only way they knew you existed. Without your emotional output, there was nothing left for them to consume. That's why the disappearance feels sudden to them, but gradual to you. You didn't vanish overnight. You withdrew slowly. You stopped over-explaining. You stopped justifying normal boundaries. You stopped correcting misunderstandings that weren't your responsibility. You stopped shaping yourself to avoid other people's discomfort. And without that effort, the illusion collapsed. This isn't step loss. This is filtration. It's Spets reality finally sorting itself. People who were connected to your output drifted away. People who could only recognize you when you were loud, agreeable, emotionally available, or endlessly accommodating lost their reference point. They were never connected to your core. They were connected to what you provided. The real you was always invisible to them. That's a hard truth, but a liberating one. Because it means you didn't fail at connection. You simply stopped supplying energy to people who mistook access for intimacy. You stopped confusing availability with closeness. You stopped equating attention with value, and that scares weak minds. Weak minds rely on external regulation. They need feedback, reactions, reassurance, and consistency from others to feel stable. When someone no longer mirrors them, explains themselves, or plays the expected role, it creates discomfort. Instead of sitting with that discomfort and reflecting inward, they project outward. They label you cold, arrogant, distant, unchanged but different. These labels are defenses. They protect them from asking a more dangerous question. Why did I need them to behave a certain way for me to feel okay? You walking away from performance forces people to confront their dependency. Most won't. It's easier to say you disappeared than to admit they never really knew you. So when someone says, "You're not the same anymore," understand this clearly. They are not mourning you. They are mourning access. They are mourning the comfort of your predictability. They are mourning the version of you that made their life easier. Good. That role was a cage. It required you to be smaller, softer, more available than you truly were. It demanded that you remain emotionally legible at all times. It punished silence. It punished boundaries. It punished self-containment. Freedom begins the moment you stop explaining yourself to people who were never listening to understand, only listening to respond. When you stop seeking validation, you don't disappear. You simply become invisible to those who never deserved to see you in the first place. And that invisibility is not weakness. It's the first sign that your life is no longer being lived for an audience. 2. Invisibility is what happens when you reclaim your energy. You didn't become distant. You became unavailable to nonsense. There is a difference, and most people are too undisciplined to tell it apart. For a long time, your energy was scattered. You gave attention without intention. You responded out of habit. You stayed engaged out of politeness. You allowed interruptions, emotional dumping, and unnecessary conversations because saying no felt harder than tolerating irritation. That constant accessibility made you visible, not respected, just reachable. When you started pulling your energy back, something strange happened. You didn't announce boundaries. You didn't explain yourself. You simply stopped offering what was never required of you in the first place. And suddenly people couldn't find you anymore. Not because you disappeared, but because your energy was no longer floating around waiting to be claimed. Most people confuse presence with availability. They think if you are not responding, reacting, or engaging the same way, you must be upset, arrogant, or lost. The truth is much simpler. You stopped leaking attention. Energy is the currency people trade in, even when they don't know they're doing it. Attention reassures, reactions stabilize, availability comforts. When you provided these things freely, people felt secure around you. When you stopped, they felt a gap. They call that gap distance. It isn't set, it steps ownership. Reclaiming your energy doesn't look dramatic. It looks boring from the outside. Fewer words, slower replies, selective engagement, no urgency to explain silence, no compulsion to fill space. And because most people live externally, this calm withdrawal feels threatening to them. They relied on your energy to regulate their inner world. Your responsiveness told them where they stood. Your engagement confirmed their importance. Without it, they feel unmoored. So they label you invisible. But invisibility is just what happens when your attention is no longer up for public use. Notice something important. You didn't become cruel. You didn't become cold. You became deliberate. And deliberateness exposes entitlement fast. People who assumed constant access suddenly feel deprived. People who never asked, only took, feel confused. They don't say, I depended on your energy. They say you've changed. That SEP's avoidance. Reclaimed energy always looks like withdrawal to people who are feeding on it. This is where many people make a mistake. They feel guilty. They interpret the quiet as rejection. They rush back to over-explaining, over-giving, over-connecting to restore balance. Unstepped. That discomfort you feel is the nervous system adjusting. You trained yourself to be externally oriented, to scan for reactions, to stay emotionally plugged in. When you unplug, there is a temporary sense of dislocation. Let it pass. Because on the other side of that discomfort is stability that doesn't depend on stimulation. Invisibility is not the absence of presence. It is the concentration of it. Your energy is no longer diluted across unnecessary interactions. It is stored, focused, directed. That's why your thinking becomes sharper. That's why your emotions settle. That's why your tolerance for noise drops. You are not less available. You are more intact. People who knew you through constant engagement won't recognize this version of you. They only knew you as a stream, not a source. When the stream dries up, they assume the source is gone. It isn't steady. It starts protected. And here is the part most people miss. When you reclaim your energy, you don't just disappear from others, you reappear to yourself. You start noticing where your attention actually goes. What drains you, what sustains you, what is habit, and what is choice. That awareness is dangerous to shallow relationships, because once you see clearly, you can't unsee it. You can't return to unconscious availability. You can't pretend every demand deserves a response. You can't keep offering access without alignment. The yes, you become harder to reach. Good. Access should be earned, not assumed. Invisibility is not punishment. It is the natural result of self-possession. And self-possession is what makes your presence matter again, only now to the right people. 3. The old you had to die for the real you to move freely. This is the part most people misunderstand. You didn't lose yourself. You shed something that was never truly you. The old version of you was built under pressure. Pressure to belong, pressure to survive emotionally, pressure to be accepted, understood, included, and needed. That version learned quickly what worked. It learned when to speak and when to stay quiet, when to soften and when to perform strength, when to give more and when to hide exhaustion. It wasn't fake, it was adaptive. But adaptation has a cost. Over time, the version of you that learned how to survive began to dictate how you lived. You started maintaining patterns long after the danger passed. You kept carrying roles that were useful once but suffocating later. You didn't notice it at first because everyone around you benefited from that version. The old you was reliable, predictable, emotionally available, easy to place. That made you accepted. It did not make you free. Freedom requires movement. And the old version of you was too busy maintaining stability for others to move honestly for yourself. Every decision had weight. Every change required explanation. Every boundary felt like betrayal. So something had to end. Not violently, not publicly, quietly. The old you didn't die in one moment. It eroded through fatigue, through disappointment, through the slow realization that no matter how much you gave, it was never enough to create security. You reached a point where continuing felt heavier than stopping. That's when the shift began. You stopped overextending. You stopped managing perceptions. You stopped correcting misunderstandings that were never misunderstandings, only refusals to see you clearly. And when you did that, people noticed something unsettling. The version of you they relied on was gone. The one that filled gaps, smoothed tensions, absorbed discomfort, and kept everything running. They called it distance. It wasn't steady. It was death of an identity that no longer fit. This is where fear enters. Because when an old identity dies, there is a gap, a space where habits used to live, a silence where reactions used to happen, and the mind panics because it doesn't recognize itself without the familiar patterns. That panic convinces people they've made a mistake. They think, I'm becoming cold. They think, I'm losing my humanity. They think, I should go back. That sets the trap. What's actually happening is that the real you is learning to move without armor, without performance, without obligation-driven behavior, and that feels unstable at first because you're no longer acting from scripts. The old you moved to maintain connection. The real you moves from alignment. That difference is everything. Alignment doesn't rush. It doesn't justify. It doesn't overfunction. It allows discomfort to exist without trying to fix it. It allows other people to feel confused without rescuing them. This is why the old you had to die, because the old you couldn't tolerate that discomfort. It was trained to soothe, explain, and repair at all costs. It believed peace came from harmony. The real you understands that peace comes from truth, and truth disrupts. When the old you dies, people feel the loss before you do. They sense something missing. The emotional infrastructure you provided is gone. The safety net, the consistency, the predictability. They might try to resurrect the old version. They ask more questions. They provoke reactions. They test boundaries. Not because they want you back, but because they want the comfort of what you provided. Do not confuse this with love. Love adapts to growth. Dependency resists it. The real you does not explain its emergence. It simply moves differently. It chooses differently. It stands still where it used to rush. And yes, some relationships cannot survive this. Not because you became worse, but because you became unmanageable. Unmanageable people are not chaotic. They are uncontrollable. They no longer fit neatly into other people's expectations. That is freedom. The old you had to die because it was built to survive an environment you no longer live in. Keeping it alive would mean shrinking your future to protect your past. So let it stay gone. What replaces it is not emptiness. It is space. And space is what finally allows the real you to move freely. 4. Most people only remember you when you serve a function. This is the truth. People avoid because it hurts the ego. Most people do not remember you. They remember what you did for them. They remember the way you showed up when they were struggling, the way you listened without interrupting, the way you absorbed tension, solved problems, smoothed conflicts, and carried weight that wasn't yours. They remember your availability, your reliability, your willingness to give more than was asked. But strip that away and watch what happens when you stop checking in, when you stop offering help before it's requested, when you stop being the emotional stabilizer. Your absence becomes noticeable, not because you are gone, but because a function is no longer being fulfilled. This is not a moral judgment. It's a psychological one. Humans organize their relationships around roles, often unconsciously. Someone becomes the listener. Someone becomes the fixer. Someone becomes the strong one. Someone becomes the forgiving one. Once a role is established, it becomes expected. And expectations erase appreciation. So when you step out of the role, people don't ask, are they okay? They ask, why on set they doing what they used to do? That question reveals everything. You were remembered because you were reliable, not because you were seen. You were valued because you were consistent, not because you were understood. You were included because you were useful, not because you were chosen. That realization stings, but it also frees you from a lie you've been living under. You are not disappearing, you are being unassigned. And being unassigned feels like rejection. If your identity was built on contribution, you start questioning yourself. You wonder if you did something wrong. You replay conversations. You consider reaching out, explaining, restoring the old dynamic. This is the critical moment. If you go back now, you don't go back out of love. You go back out of fear. Fear of being forgotten. Fear of being irrelevant. Fear of not being needed. But need is not the same as connection. Real connection survives the removal of function. It adapts when roles change. It doesn't collapse the moment you stop carrying weight. So when relationships thin out after you stop overgiving, that is information, not punishment. It tells you exactly what you were being valued for. This is where people get angry. They feel used. They feel foolish. They start rewriting the past in harsh terms. That bitterness is understandable, but dangerous. Bitterness keeps you stuck in reaction. Clarity moves you forward. The clearer interpretation is this: you trained people to interact with you in a specific way, and when you changed the terms, many were unwilling or unable to adapt. That doesn't make them evil. It makes the relationship shallow. Depth requires flexibility. Function requires consistency. Most people choose function. That's why they remember you only when they need something. You weren't loved less. You were accessed less. And access is addictive. When access disappears, people experience discomfort. They might reach out suddenly. They might act confused. They might frame your withdrawal as betrayal. This is not about you. It's about the removal of a service they quietly depended on. The mistake would be believing this means you have no value outside of what you provide. That belief is exactly what kept you trapped in over-functioning in the first place. Your value was never in the role. The role was just the easiest way for others to keep you close. Now that the role is gone, what remains is choice. Who stays when you are not useful? Who adjusts instead of demands? Who respects silence instead of punishing it? Those answers matter more than any reassurance you could receive. So let people remember you less. Let your name stop coming up in moments of convenience. What you lose in visibility, you gain in truth. Because the people who only remember you when you serve a function were never relating to you. They were relating to what you provided. And walking away from that is not abandonment. It is self-respect. And 5. Freedom feels like emptiness before it feels like peace. This is the phase almost no one warns you about. When you stop performing, stop overgiving, stop chasing connection, and stop filling space just to feel alive, something unsettling appears. Silence, not the peaceful kind at first, the hollow kind. No constant messages, no emotional noise, no one pulling on your attention. Your mind interprets this as something being wrong. It tells you that you are losing people, that you are becoming isolated, that you made a mistake by pulling back. It frames the quiet as evidence of failure. This is false, but convincing. For a long time, your nervous system learned to associate activity with safety. Engagement meant relevance. Responsiveness meant belonging. Emotional exchange meant value. When those signals disappear, the body doesn't think freedom, it thinks danger. So the emptiness feels heavy, uncomfortable, even painful. This is not because something is missing. It's because something familiar is gone. You are experiencing withdrawal, not from people but from stimulation, from validation, from constant external feedback that told you who you were in relation to others. That feedback was noisy, exhausting, and addictive. Most people mistake this stage for loneliness and immediately rush to fill it. They scroll more. They reach out to people they outgrew. They reinsert themselves into old dynamics just to feel something again. That's how freedom is traded back for comfort. Do not do that. This emptiness is not a void. It is a clearing. For the first time, your inner world is not crowded by reactions, expectations, and emotional obligations. There is space, but you don't yet know how to inhabit it. So it feels empty. Peace always feels empty to a system addicted to chaos. Chaos was familiar. It gave you identity. It kept you busy. It made you feel needed. Peace removes all that at once, and the ego panics because it no longer knows how to prove itself. In this phase, you might notice strange urges. The desire to explain yourself to people who didn't ask. The impulse to post, message, or perform just to confirm that you still exist. The temptation to recreate noise where none is needed. These urges are not intuition. They are withdrawal symptoms. Sit with them. The mind wants stimulation. The nervous system wants regulation, and it will try to pull you back into old patterns because they are known, even if they were harmful. But if you stay still long enough, something shifts. The emptiness begins to soften. Your thoughts slow down. Your reactions lose urgency. You stop reaching for distraction as often. The silence becomes less threatening and more neutral. Then, gradually, it becomes restful. This is the moment. Peace begins to emerge, not as excitement, but as stability. A steady baseline, a sense that nothing needs to happen right now for you to be okay. Peace is not loud. It does not announce itself. It does not thrill. It stabilizes. And that's why people overlook it. Peace doesn't validate your suffering. It doesn't reward your effort with applause. It simply allows you to exist without tension. That feels empty only if you're used to earning your worth through engagement. Here's the hard truth. If emptiness feels unbearable, it means your sense of self was outsourced. It relied on external input to feel real. When that input disappears, you feel unreal. That doesn't mean you are broken. It means you are finally becoming internal, and that process is uncomfortable because it removes crutches you didn't know you were using. Do not romanticize this stage. Do not demonize it either. It is a passage. If you rush through it, you carry old dependencies into your new life. If you sit with it, you build a foundation that doesn't collapse when attention disappears. Freedom does not arrive as relief. It arrives as quiet. And only those who can tolerate that quiet long enough ever get to experience real peace. When you don't exist to them, you finally exist to yourself. At some point, something subtle but permanent happens. You stop checking. You don't consciously decide to stop. It just fades. The habit of wondering who noticed. The impulse to measure your worth by response, recognition, or reaction. The background anxiety of how you're being perceived. It loses relevance. This is the moment you begin existing from the inside instead of the outside. Before this, your sense of self was relational. It formed through feedback, through how others responded to you, through your role in their lives. You knew who you were by how you were received. That's not a flaw. It's how most people survive. But it's also unstable. When your identity depends on reflection, it shatters the moment the mirror disappears. When people stop responding, stop engaging, stop acknowledging you, it feels like erasure until it doesn't. When you no longer exist in other people's narratives, you are forced to confront something essential. Who are you when no one is watching? Who are you when no one needs anything from you? Who are you when there is no audience, no feedback, no affirmation? At first, this feels disorienting. You might feel smaller, quieter, less defined. The ego interprets this as loss. It stops not. It sumps compression. Your identity is no longer stretched across multiple expectations. It is condensing into something coherent, something self-referenced, something that doesn't need constant confirmation. This is where many people make a mistake. They think independence means isolation. They think self-existence means cutting everyone off. That's not what's happening here. You are not withdrawing from people. You are withdrawing from dependency. There is a difference. Dependency says, I need you to reflect me back to myself. Presence says, I know who I am whether you see it or not. When you stop existing for others, you stop narrating your life in advance. You stop anticipating reactions. You stop editing decisions to avoid misunderstanding. You move more simply. Your choices come from alignment, not impression management. You do things because they feel right, not because they will be understood. You speak when there is something to say, not because silence feels dangerous. This changes your entire posture. Your voice slows, your reactions soften, your boundaries stop feeling defensive, not because you care less, but because you are no longer negotiating your existence. And here's the uncomfortable truth. This version of you is harder to control. People cannot pull on your guilt as easily. They cannot rush you with urgency. They cannot destabilize you with withdrawal of attention. That's why some will feel uneasy around you, not because you are cold, but because you are no longer readable. They don't know where they stand. They don't know how to get a reaction. They don't know how to place you back into a familiar role. Some will try. They may reach out suddenly. They may provoke. They may test old dynamics. This is not reconnection. It's recalibration. They are checking whether the old levers still work. If you respond from your center instead of your habit, the answer will be clear. And once it sets clear, something else happens. You stop chasing belonging, not because you reject connection, but because you no longer need it to validate your existence. You can enjoy people without leaning on them. You can be close without being consumed. You can be alone without feeling erased. This is what it means to exist to yourself. You become the reference point. Your worth is no longer negotiated. Your identity is no longer up for discussion. Your presence is no longer a performance. And from that place, connection becomes optional, not compulsory, which is why it finally becomes real. 7. You don't exist anymore, and that's why you stare untouchable. This is where everything settles, not explosively, but permanently. You are no longer trying to be understood, included, approved of, or remembered in the way you once were. Not because you failed at connection, but because you outgrew the need to negotiate your existence through other people's reactions. When you no longer exist in the mental economy of expectations, you become unreachable by the mechanisms that once controlled you. People cannot manipulate what they cannot access. They cannot destabilize what does not seek validation. They cannot punish what does not fear disappearance. Earlier, attention felt like oxygen. Silence felt like suffocation. Now the equation has reversed. Attention has become noise, and silence has become structure. You are no longer calibrated to external signals. Praise does not inflate you. Absence does not shrink you. Criticism does not wound you the way it once did, because it no longer threatens your identity. It is simply information, and often not even useful information. This is what it means to be untouchable. Not emotionally armored, not detached in a bitter way. Untouchable, because there is nothing exposed that depends on external approval to survive. Your sense of self is no longer stored in other people's perceptions, so their withdrawal carries no leverage. Their opinions lose their weight, because they are no longer holding anything up. This is why people struggle to define what changed about you. They sense a shift, but they cannot locate it. You are not louder. You are not colder. You are not performing strength. You are simply no longer available for emotional transactions that require you to shrink, bend, explain, or overextend. And because most social influence operates through guilt, obligation, urgency, or approval, removing yourself from that system makes you difficult to influence. You no longer react on cue. You no longer rush to clarify misunderstandings that are rooted in projection. You no longer feel compelled to defend yourself against interpretations that say more about the observer than about you. That absence of reactivity is often misread as indifference, but it is something else entirely. It is self-containment. Self-containment changes how power operates around you. People cannot pull you into chaos because chaos requires participation. They cannot bait you into arguments because arguments require ego investment. They cannot shame you into compliance because shame only works when belonging is still being negotiated. When you are no longer trying to secure a place, there is nothing to threaten. This does not mean you withdraw from life. It means you enter it differently. You choose instead of react. You engage without attaching your worth to the outcome. You allow people to misunderstand you without rushing to correct the narrative. Not because you are hiding, but because your reality does not depend on consensus. This is where real freedom lives. Not in being admired, not in being remembered, not in being significant to everyone. Freedom lives in being internally stable, regardless of how visible you are. It lives in knowing that even if you were completely misread, ignored, or forgotten, you would still be intact. When you don't exist anymore in the world of expectations, you stop being reachable by its pressures. You cannot be rushed by timelines that are not yours. You cannot be controlled by the fear of exclusion. You cannot be weakened by the withdrawal of attention. You are no longer playing the game that rewards performance and punishes authenticity. This is not isolation, it is sovereignty. You exist now in a way that does not require witnesses. Your choices are quieter but more precise. Your presence is lighter but more grounded. You move without announcing yourself, and because of that, you move freely. You don't exist anymore to the systems that once defined you, measured you, and extracted energy from you, and because of that, you are no longer exposed to them. That is not disappearance. That is immunity. 8. You return only by choice, not by need. After you stop existing for the noise, something subtle changes in how you relate to the world. You don't feel pulled back by emptiness anymore, and you don't feel pushed away by overwhelm. You feel neutral, grounded, able to decide. This is the first time connection becomes optional rather than necessary. Before, returning to people was driven by need. The need to be seen, reassured, included, remembered. Even when you pulled away, there was a background tension that kept you half attached. You were gone, but watching, quiet, but waiting. That phase ends here. Now, if you return, it is because you want to, not because silence feels unbearable. This distinction matters more than anything else. When you return out of need, you recreate the same dynamics. You re-enter roles. You resume patterns. You teach people again how to access you without respect. When you return by choice, the terms are different. Your energy does not spread thin. Your attention does not become a public resource. You engage without surrendering yourself. Choice changes posture. You no longer over-explain your absence. You no longer justify your boundaries. You don't apologize for being selective. Your presence becomes deliberate, measured, clean. People feel the difference immediately, even if they cannot articulate it. Some will welcome it. They adjust. They meet you where you are. They don't demand the old version back. These are the connections that survive evolution. Others will resist. They will push for familiarity. They will reference the past. They will test whether your availability can be restored. Not maliciously, but instinctively. Familiar access feels safer to them than respectful distance. This is where discernment replaces guilt. You do not need to explain why you won't re-enter an old role. You do not need to defend your pace. You do not need to prove that your boundaries are reasonable. Choice does not argue. It simply stands. Returning by choice also means you stop trying to be understood by everyone you engage with. You allow misunderstanding to exist without correcting it. You let people form opinions without shaping them. This is not indifference. It is efficiency. You save your energy for places where it can actually land. Notice what changes when you do this. Conversations deepen or end quickly. Ambiguity resolves itself. People either adapt or drift away without drama. There is less friction because you are no longer negotiating your presence. This is how a clean life forms, not through cutting people off aggressively, but through refusing to re-enter dynamics that require self-betrayal. Not through grand declarations, but through consistent alignment. You show up as you are, and you let the consequences sort themselves. Returning by choice also means you stop mistaking potential for obligation. Just because something could be repaired does not mean it should be. Just because someone wants access does not mean it benefits you to grant it. Choice evaluates impact, not possibility. This is maturity. You become comfortable with fewer connections that are real, rather than many that are draining. You stop measuring life by how full your calendar is and start measuring it by how intact you feel afterward. Presence becomes something you offer, not something others extract. And here is the quiet truth. When you return only by choice, people feel safer around you, not because you are more available, but because you are more honest. Your yes means something. Your no is clear. Your presence is stable, because it is not coerced by fear of absence. This is the final refinement. You don't disappear from the world. You stop dissolving into it. You move in and out with intention. You connect without entanglement. You remain sovereign, whether you are alone or with others. And from this place, whatever you build next will not require you to lose yourself to keep it alive. 9. You live without explaining yourself anymore. At this stage, something fundamental shifts in how you move through the world. You stop narrating your life. You stop preemptively justifying decisions. You stop offering context to make your choices easier for others to digest. Not because you are hiding, but because you no longer feel responsible for managing other people's understanding. Earlier in your life, explanation felt necessary. If you didn't explain, you feared being misjudged. If you were misjudged, you feared being rejected. So you learned to talk ahead of time, soften choices, give reasons, provide background, and clarify intentions. Explanation became a form of self-protection, but protection slowly turned into permission-seeking. You were not just explaining what you were doing. You were asking silently if it was acceptable. When you stop existing for external validation, that habit dissolves. You realize something uncomfortable but freeing. Most explanations do not create understanding. They create negotiation. They invite opinions. They open space for people to approve, disapprove, reinterpret, or interfere. So you stop, not abruptly. Naturally, you make decisions and let them stand. You change direction without a speech. You say less and mean more. If someone misunderstands, you allow it to remain unresolved unless clarity truly matters. If someone feels unsettled by your silence, you do not rush to soothe it. This does not make you careless. It makes you precise. You begin to see how often explanations were never about truth. They were about control. You were trying to control how you were perceived so you could control how you were treated. When that need disappears, so does the compulsion to explain. You accept a reality. Most people resist. You will be misunderstood sometimes, no matter how clearly you speak. Once you accept that, explanation loses its power. Living without explaining yourself does not mean you never communicate. It means you communicate when there is mutual respect, not when there is entitlement. You speak where your words can land. You remain silent where they would only be consumed, twisted, or ignored. This simplifies your life more than anything else you have done. Decisions become lighter. Relationships become clearer. People who require constant explanations slowly fall away because they cannot tolerate autonomy in others. People who respect self-direction stay because they do not need access to your reasoning to trust your choices. You also stop overthinking timing, tone, and delivery. You no longer rehearse conversations in your head. You no longer feel the urge to prepare defenses for choices you have already made. That mental space returns to you, and with it comes steadiness. Living without explanation is not arrogance. It is alignment made visible. Your actions speak without needing commentary. Your boundaries hold without justification. Your absence makes sense without an excuse. This is what it means to live from the inside out. You no longer need consensus to move forward. You no longer delay decisions waiting for emotional clearance from others. You trust yourself enough to act without external confirmation. That trust did not come from confidence-building exercises or motivation. It came from surviving the quiet, from tolerating emptiness, from choosing presence over performance, from learning that nothing breaks when you stop explaining. The world does not collapse. People adjust or they don't. Life continues, and you continue, finally, without carrying the burden of being understood. That is not indifference. That is freedom integrated into daily life. 10. You become difficult to replace and impossible to use. This is the final shift, and it is quiet enough that many people don't notice it until much later. You are no longer trying to be indispensable, impressive, or irreplaceable. You are simply intact. And that changes everything about how you are perceived and how you are treated. Earlier in your life, you tried to matter by being needed. You offered reliability, availability, emotional labor, consistency, and effort in excess. You believed that if you could not be replaced, you would be safe. That belief kept you useful, but it also kept you exposed. Anything that makes you useful to everyone makes you disposable to the wrong people. Now that has ended. You are no longer trying to earn permanence through service. You no longer build your value around what you can provide, fix, absorb, or tolerate. Because of that, something paradoxical happens. You stop being easy to replace. Not because you are rare in talent or exceptional in performance, but because you are no longer interchangeable. Interchangeable people are defined by function. Anyone can step in and do the same role. Anyone can offer the same availability. Anyone can replace output, but presence that is self-contained, deliberate, and non-dependent cannot be replicated easily. It is not loud. It is not flashy. It is precise. People feel that precision. You no longer rush to fill gaps. You no longer compete for relevance. You no longer try to secure your place by overextending. So when you show up, it is clean. When you speak, it is measured. When you engage, it is intentional. That makes you difficult to use. Use requires access. Access requires entitlement. Entitlement requires your participation. You removed your participation. You do not react quickly enough to be manipulated. You do not explain enough to be negotiated with endlessly. You do not offer enough emotional leverage to be pulled into obligations that are not yours. This frustrates people who are accustomed to extracting energy from others. They sense limits they cannot cross. They sense that pressure no longer works. They sense that guilt does not land the same way. And because of that, they either adjust or disengage. This is not cruelty. It is clarity. Being impossible to use does not mean you become closed. It means your openness is no longer unconditional. It means your generosity has structure. It means your presence is no longer free-floating. You give where there is reciprocity, respect, and alignment. You withhold where there is expectation, entitlement, or pressure. And you do this without anger, explanation, or announcement. That is what makes it sustainable. You also stop trying to leave impressions. You no longer worry about how long you will be remembered, how much impact you had, or whether someone will notice your absence. You trust that what is real leaves a trace without effort. And here is the final truth. When you stop trying to be irreplaceable, you become unforgettable to the right people and irrelevant to the wrong ones. That is the correct outcome. You are no longer optimized for consumption. You are optimized for coherence. Your life is no longer arranged to keep others comfortable. It is arranged to keep you whole. Nothing about this feels dramatic day to day. It feels ordinary, stable, quiet. You wake up without needing to prove anything. You move without rehearsing explanations. You engage without losing yourself. You are not chasing freedom anymore. You are living inside it. And that is why you don't exist anymore in the old sense. Not as a role, not as a function, not as a reflection in other people's minds. You exist as yourself, and that is finally enough. You don't need to return to who you were. That version of you existed to survive, to belong, to be seen in a world that rewarded performance and punished stillness. It did its job. It kept you moving long enough to reach this point, but it was never meant to stay. What you are now does not need to be announced. It does not need to be explained. It does not need to be recognized to be real. You have learned what happens when you stop offering yourself as a service and start living as a presence. Nothing collapses. The noise fades. What remains is solid. Some people will not follow you here. They cannot. Because this place requires self-responsibility. It requires letting go of leverage, drama, and dependence. That is not a loss. That is alignment doing its work. You will be misunderstood at times. You will be less visible. You will be remembered less often by those who only knew you through what you provided. Let that happen. What is built on performance must end when performance ends. You are no longer here to be consumed, managed, or defined by external reactions. You are here to move with clarity, to choose with intention, and to remain intact regardless of who is watching. You don't exist anymore in the old way, and that is not disappearance. That is freedom lived quietly and completely.